Welcome to the FinTech website presentation brought to you by the BMA FinTech Department. For those new to the BMA, we are the department that regulates both the digital asset business and digital asset issuances in Bermuda. My name is Akshay Zubair. I'm a FinTech specialist at BMA, and I'd like to introduce Christos Eftimiopoulos as well. He's also a FinTech specialist. And as Maud has mentioned, we will be your co-host for this webinar. As a general rule of thumb, we'll be going through the presentation and taking any questions at the end. If you have any questions, reach out to us at fintech@bma.bm. As a lot of you are aware, we have been working on the development of our landing pages for digital asset business and digital asset issuances for quite a while. The update was a result of feedback derived from the market in relation to website navigation, but also the launch of several new documents, as well as updates to existing documents that have been made. We figured that we could create landing pages for those licensees and registrants, as well as applicants for both regimes, to have like a one-stop area for all of your informational requirements as it pertains to these regimes. So with that, let's get into the presentation. The topics that we'll cover include the digital asset business section, the digital asset issuance section, updated and new forms, and then as well as an opportunity for Q&A. So if we're getting to digital asset business, the BMA issued the Digital Asset Business Act in 2018 and has since been regulating the digital asset business activities from within Bermuda. These activities include, but are not limited to, issuing, selling, or redeeming virtual coins or any other form of digital assets, operating an electronic exchange, and even offering custodial wallet services. The regulations, as a lot of you have been aware as well, have been amended since launch, and we will seek to continue to amend them to ensure they remain fit for purpose and keep pace with market evolutions. So if I get into, so this is what the landing page looks like for digital asset business. The way that you get there is you click on licensed sectors and digital asset business. So try to keep it very simple. Here you'll find all the fundamental information you require, whether you're applying for a license or you're already regulated by us. We have a few different sections in this particular landing page. So we have the digital asset business legislation, policy guidance and relevant documents, discussion and consultation papers, frequently asked questions, the Global Financial Innovation Network, as well as forms and questionnaires. So when digital asset business legislation is selected, you'll see a drop down that actually pops up, and that will have the latest version of the act as a part of that. It will also have the updated rules. You'll have the DAB account rules, the digital asset business annual return rules, the digital asset business client disclosure rules, as well as the cybersecurity rules. So this page is intended to always be updated to have the latest and greatest. So if you're ever wondering whether or not you have the latest, definitely just go to the website and you can check from there. When you click on policy guidance and relevant documents, you can find all the relevant documentation as it pertains to the statement of principles, information bulletin, so information about how to apply, head office guidance, which is a new document, product due diligence guidance, also a new document. You'll find relevant codes, so the digital asset business code of practice, as well as the digital asset business custody code of practice. From an AML front, we've also included a lot of key documents that will be important for you to review as you're applying. So that includes the Proceeds of Crime Regulations 2008, guidance notes for regulated financial institutions on AML ATF financing, the sector-specific guidance notes for digital asset business, sanctions regulations 2013, as well as the financial sanctions implementations unit sanctions regime. So again, a lot of important information and really an area for you to kind of have all of your documents in one spot. We will also have a bucket around discussion and consultation papers. As you know, we're a newer regime and a lot of our learnings come from interacting with the market, and we want to make sure that our guidance and regulations are fit for purpose. So we'll always have a link to open consultation papers for you to kind of respond to, or if you're not willing to respond or not able to respond, you can just review them and kind of have an idea of where we're going. But also the archive ones, so you can kind of see how we've kind of made our decisions and interacted with the market in the past. And so for a lot of these files, when you click on them, they'll just download directly to your downloads folder. But for the discussion consultation papers, it will be just direct you to a different section of the BMA website. So that's what will happen. The FAQs is, of course, a good area. That's also what we like to send out as a part of our information package. The FAQs that are on the website right now are updated. So if you haven't reviewed the latest ones, definitely take a look, because we have appended quite a bit of information, including like our differentiation between the license classes, which is a hot topic for a lot of the market. We also have a section on the Global Financial Innovation Network, or GFIN for short, where you can find all applicable information in relation to the Global Sandbox Initiative with the GFIN. So GFIN generally comprises of 60 regulatory organizations from around the world. With about 30 of them, we engage in a cross-border testing or global sandbox. And here you can find information about that cross-border sandbox more specifically. So the press release that we've issued, the application form. So the application form that we would have on our website is the same that other regulators would have on their website. It's a coordinated approach. A compendium, which includes like, information on the regimes that each of the different regulators have and what they're willing to sandbox. And then as well, FAQs that we've jointly developed with the other regulators. So all the information is here if you're interested in learning more about it, or if you're interested in applying for the sandbox where you're looking to scale your operations in multiple jurisdictions, like definitely take a look at this. Then we get into forms and questionnaires, and here you can find all applicable forms that we've developed. A lot of these are new and they've come from feedback that we've derived from the market where companies were submitting ad hoc information based on requirements that we had set out. So we actually just went ahead and created forms. So it's a little bit more standard for you. And so these include the financial form. That's something that's used by our regulated institutions that are filing, for example, KPIs. And kind of demonstrating to us that they're meeting the minimum net asset requirement. The material change notification form is also a really good one used by registrants in the hope that, a certain standard information is submitted to us as it pertains to any material changes to the business. Annual return submission form, same thing, compliance certificate as well. We also have application forms. So a lot of you have seen these already because we have started sending them out for those that have been requesting it. But we have application forms for both the class F, M, and T to kind of streamline that process a little bit further for the market as well. And then we also have the institutional and personal questionnaires, which Christos will be getting into, but generally these are filled out by key members of any of the entities that are applying or have applied but have new entrants to their business. So a key feature that I really want to mention is e-alerts. So we actually have an e-alerts mailing list on our website. So if you subscribe, anytime that we have an update to the BMA website or we've issued a new document, generally we like to send that out via e-alerts. So if you're on this mailing list, because you subscribed, you'll get that notification. So you'll kind of always remain up to date. So definitely subscribe if that's what your interest is. But know that if you check the BMA website every now and then, you're likely to find updated information anyways. That's that. And then we'll get into the digital asset issuance section. So the Digital Asset Issuance Act was released in 2020 and was meant to revise the pre-existing ICO legislation that you might be familiar with. We wanted to make sure that as I mentioned previously, that our regs remain fit for purpose. So that's what we did. And we also bring those activities of issuances within the remit of the BMA, such that now the BMA regulates the full spectrum of digital asset activities in or from within Bermuda. So when you're going to the digital asset issuance landing page, you get there the same way as you would the digital asset business. So you hit licensed sectors and digital asset issuance. And then this screen looks really familiar because it looks like the digital asset business landing page as well. It just has fewer sections. So we have the legislation, policy guidance and relevant documents, consultation papers, as well as forms and questionnaires. So under legislation, you'll find the act and the rules. Under policy and guidance and relevant documents, you'll find the statement of principles. Consultation papers, same idea as the digital asset business, where there'll be a link to open consultation papers and a link to archived as well. Forms and questionnaires, the IQ and the PQ are the same as digital asset business. The new forms here are the application form for digital asset issuance. So when you're talking to us, we might refer to it as DI or DIA. So that's what this is. And then there's also an exemption form because there are certain exemptions in the Act under Section 5, subsection 2, as well as Section 16, subsection 2. So instead of having you prepare ad hoc information on that, we actually created an application form for that. And then you can use that to kind of file supplemental information to us. Again, with the e-alerts, so same thing for as the business regime. If you subscribe to e-alerts, anytime that we issue an update, we will send e-alerts out through our mailing list. So if you're subscribed, you'll definitely be the first to get it. So this is our office hours. So again, a lot of you are aware because I know a lot of you have taken advantage of this already. But as we kind of moved further into a digital world, particularly this last year, we wanted to make sure that our doors were open, so digitally, if not physically. So this is a meeting that can be scheduled by anyone in the market who wishes to, introduce themselves to us, have a discussion on the market innovation, or get a general sense of what our regime is about. This meeting is led by the market and for the market. And then I guess in relation to today's presentation as well, if you want further discussion on anything that you hear, feel free to use office hours to kind of book that meeting with us. I do want to mention it is a 20-minute discussion. You're not limited to 20 minutes. You can always have further office hours or request a longer meeting time, and that's fine too. And you don't have to be, at any particular stage of your business to talk to us. We've met with companies that are very advanced. We've also met with companies that aren't even companies yet. They're just ideas. So it's really the full spectrum. Our availability, it will be on the Calendly link. So this is the link itself. If you want to jot that down or reach out to us, we can definitely send you the link as well. You'll find our availability as well as the hours on the Calendly link.
AXA, is there a link to the office hours on the redesigned website?
There is. You can actually do it on it's on the digital asset business and digital asset issuance landing pages as well. You can just directly do it from there, or you can go to the link, or you can reach out to us. Lots of avenues, and generally we're very happy to provide that information to you. I do want to make mention that when you're submitting digital asset business applications and digital asset issuance applications, there's definitely a team behind it. So from the FinTech department's perspective, this is generally who we'll be speaking to. So Moad Femi, he is a senior advisor and he heads up the digital asset department. So Moad, if you want to wave, I think most people know you. I've been talking, so this is me. Christos, if you want to wave as well. We also have Wendell Laws and James Howard, FinTech examiners on the team. If you guys want to wave as well. Great. For general inquiries, you can reach out to any of us. You can also reach out to fintech@bma.bm. This is a mailbox that's managed by all of us. So anyone will respond to you. So between this and this, like you will get a response for sure. So yeah, and throughout the application process, we will go through several cycles of reviews with your application. You'll have discussions. So any one of us can be a lead regulator on your file. So we will be conversing quite a lot with you. And because our team is quite small, you'll likely see some of us or all of us, depending on the size of your business. So now we'll get into the updated and new documents. So there are a few of them that we wanted to just jump into. So we wanted to briefly mention the statement of principles, which have been amended to include the new class of license, which we've released as a part of the sandbox. This is the Class T or test license. I'd also like to reference the code of practice, which has been updated to include 2 new sections. So that's business over the internet as well as product due diligence. So from a business over the internet perspective, this is not a new requirement per se, but it's been introduced to clarify that disclosure requirements are applicable in a digital environment as well. And then especially in view of the way DApps carry out their business, which is exclusively non-face-to-face and in a digital environment, particularly in the last year as well, this clarification is deemed to be very crucial for legal and regulatory certainty purposes. So definitely take a look at the document, which kind of lays out the requirements further. Then we also have the product due diligence guidance. So further to the new section of the code of practice, this guidance has been issued to provide the industry with further clarity around due diligence that's required to be carried out by a DAB in relation to a new product or service or a material change to an existing one. It should be read in conjunction with the pertinent section of the code of practice. So the code sets out the requirements and the guidance elaborates further on the requirements. So the guidance sets out the internal due diligence required to be carried out by the DAB prior to proceeding with the notification. So you can do the notification via the material change notification form. But we still expect a certain level of diligence that's continuously carried out with the business as you evolve. So we want to make sure that you're managing a risk register, that you're doing a holistic review, and that you're looking at the evolution of that product or service. And because we have some guidance doesn't mean that that's the entirety of the guidance. We still expect like certain decisions to be made by your board or key members of your organization to make sure that you're being prudent on any new product or service that you're introducing. And this becomes really, really important, especially with innovative and complex products that are newer to the market and are still being studied and are actually largely untested. I'll briefly reference the head office guidance as well, which I think is on the next slide. So the head office guidance has been developed in view of the global reach of digital asset operators and the inherent complexities and challenges encountered by the pertinent sector when trying to understand how to actually adhere to this requirement and what that means, particularly in this world that we're living in now. So the document sets out information and clarification on the evaluation of compliance in relation to the head office requirements, which is actually section 21 of the Digital Asset Business Act. So there's 3 primary and secondary factors. So what we expect is a holistic assessment taking into consideration the nature, scale, complexity, and risk profile of the applicant, or if you're or the license holder. So I do want to mention that the head office requirement is applicable only for Class F and M licenses. This is not applicable to Class T. For head office, we adopt a factors-based substance over form approach when evaluating compliance. The assessment will definitely be based on a proportional principle. So we'll look at the nature, scale, complexity, risk profile. We can't stress that enough. We don't want to have onerous expectations of a Class T. That doesn't make sense. It's not conducive to innovation. So we want to make sure that you're growing with us. So that's definitely something to consider. So for newly licensed undertakings, partial compliance may be deemed adequate if the DAB has made demonstration to us so that you're going to be compliant at a certain point. So whether that's getting a bigger office or that you're going to have a certain amount of staff based on your projections, like we will kind of go with you according to your plan. So we'll look for that evolution. It's not necessarily required at the point of application. Right, so that's everything that I wanted to speak about in relation to some of the forms and some of the website. But I'll hand it over to Christos now, who will dig a little bit deeper into the application forms and some of the other documents that we have.
Thank you very much for that, Aksa. So good day from me as well. Welcome to this webinar. So I have a bad habit of talking fast, so I'm going to try to pace myself. But again, in case you have any questions after that, feel free to reach out. I'm going to start speaking about the application forms that we have developed under the digital asset framework, so both under DABA and DIA. So if we can go to the Class F application. As Aksa mentioned, the application forms have been developed to streamline and facilitate the application process, and they intend to provide clarity around the authority's expectations in relation to each and every license class when it comes to DABA and in relation to issuers under DIA. When you open the document, you're going to see that it's going to be in protected view. So as a first step, the first thing that you would need to do is select the enable editing box, and then subsequently you will need to select the enable content box so that all macros in the document are enabled. This will enable you to actually fill in information and attach documentation. When it comes to supplementing documentation that may either be attached in the body of the application form itself or be sent separately, if you want to attach it in the form itself, you need to follow these steps. You need to select Insert from the top tab. Then you need to select the text box. Then you would need to select Object. Then you would see a box which says display as icon, so you will need to tick it, and then you would select a file type. This is in order to attach documents to the body of the application form itself. This is one way to do it. Otherwise, if the document is too large or if it does not work from your end, you can upload, you can send us an email to fintech@bma.bm, and then it can, after communication with the FinTech team, it can be uploaded either on the authority's secure drive or a Teams file can be created, and then documents can be shared there. The application forms should be signed electronically. If applicants do not have an electronic signature software in place and are thus not able to do so, they can either email the application unsigned to fintech@bma.bm, and then we will be forwarding you back the form to the individuals identified in the Declarations tab to DocuSign the document. So you're going to be receiving a DocuSign notification in your email, or otherwise, which is not necessarily the preferred option that given that we are moving digital. You can always print the application form, you can sign it, you can scan it and send it to us via email to the FinTech team mailbox. Again, not necessarily the most preferred option, but it is an alternative in case you face any difficulties with the other routes. When it comes to the application tabs, as you will notice, there are several tabs in the application form. So the first one after the instructions would be the applicant details. Under this tab, you're going to see that we require the input of information pertaining to the applicant, including some group entities. As you can see in this tab, there is also an option to apply at this stage for an exemption from any of the requirements under the Act, statutory or regulatory, in terms of Section 8. So if an applicant wishes to apply for such exemption at this stage, then also relevant details should also be provided in this tab. Again, I'm not going to be going through each and every cell of the application form itself, just to introduce you to certain features of the application form and potentially preempt some questions that you may have. Under the business plan tab, it sets out the minimum information to be included in a business plan. So being cognizant that there is a little bit of uncertainty as to the type of information that should be included in the business plan. So we're always fighting with it's either maybe too little or too much. This tab sets out the minimum information to be included in a business plan. So this will ensure that applicants are aware of the information required to be disclosed to the authority and will hopefully prevent any unnecessary round of comments leading to expediency of when processing an application. What we would like to note is that not all sections are required to be included in a business plan. Obviously, this will largely depend on an applicant's specific business model. So in relation to what they propose to do, potentially not all sections are going to be applicable. If we move to the declarations tab, you're going to be seeing certain drop-down boxes. The applicant should be selecting yes from the drop-down boxes, and then they should insert the name, email, and their position. The date and signature box, as you will see, is macro protected, which is locked because going back to what I mentioned before, the application form is meant to be signed electronically. So it is macro protected. So you either sign it electronically, should you have a software in place, or you send it to us, and then via DocuSign, we're going to be sending it back to you for electronic signature. Or otherwise, you can always print it, sign it, and scan it. Again, the less preferred option, but it's still an option. Under the documentation checklist, you're going to be seeing all the documentation and information that is required to be submitted as part of an application pack. So in order for a submission to be deemed as complete, this information, I'm not going to be saying all this information because again, it largely depends on the type of operations, needs to be there. Example of supporting documents would be the business plan. So whereas I mentioned before the relevant tab, which includes the minimum sections or information to be included in a business plan, we would like to highlight that an actual business plan is still required to be attached to the form. Also personal questionnaires and institutional questionnaires, again, to the extent applicable, or PQs and IQs, as we call them, for the required controllers and officers. I'm going to be going later on into further detail as to what is the rationale and by whom they should be completed. Also, the cybersecurity program of the applicant, as you're going to be seeing from the tab, there is also a maturity status in relation to cybersecurity program, and the maturity status is going to depend on the license class being applied for. So obviously for a class F, we're going to require, in most instances, full maturity. But when it comes to class T, draft versions or advanced draft versions would suffice. And also the AML, ATF, and sanctions program. Again, these are just examples of supplementing information and documentation required to be submitted as part of the application pack. As we said, all application forms follow the same logic. There is a lot of overlap. So for a class M and class T, maybe the quality of information is going to be different given the change of the scope of this license class. But when it comes to the process, to the logic and the way of submission, it's exactly the same. The second form that I would like to present is the exemption form under DIA. Again, when it comes to the application form under DIA, it follows the same logic. So where a person falls, as I mentioned before, under any of the exemptions, under sections 52, which is the placement, or 16, paragraph 2 of DIA, which is the digital asset issuance, for example, digital asset issuance through an accredited digital asset business, that person is still required to complete and submit an exemption form to the authority in order to avail itself of the asset exemption. So that exemption will not be automatically triggered. We would still need to become aware of certain information and why it should be exempted under the requirements of the Act, or from which requirements under the Act. Again, the logic and the process is exactly the same as with all other application forms, attaching documents, electronic signatures, and so on and so forth. The exemption forms, as you may see, require some general details on the issuer and the proposed issuance. So whereas some information is required to be disclosed as to whether an exemption is applicable in relation to the specific issuer or issuance, it's not the same granularity as under an application form. It's more of a high-level information. So for us to be in a position to determine whether an exemption is availed correctly. The next forms that I would like to be speaking about are the personal questionnaire and the institutional questionnaire forms. So these forms, they have been jointly developed by the FinTech and the BTCSI departments of the authority. The fact that it has been jointly developed by two departments means that if a person is being proposed to hold multiple roles in entities falling under different legislations being administered by both departments, they would be required to submit only one form, again for expediency and streamlining purposes, unless obviously there is updated information or there is sector-specific information in relation to a particular proposed role, in which case the new information only will be required to be submitted. And then the authority will collaborate internally in processing the application. When it comes to the process to complete and submit the PQs and IQs is exactly the same as the application forms. So when in relation to attaching documents, in relation to electronic signatures, submitting to the authority, it's exactly the same. So the same process would apply. Now, the PQ is applicable to key officials, shareholder controllers, and beneficial owners who are individuals, whereas the IEQ is applicable to institutional shareholder controllers. This is the main demarcation. So if we're talking about a physical person, it would be a PQ, a personal questionnaire. If we're talking about a legal person or a legal arrangement, being a shareholder controller, meaning a shareholder of the entity, of the applicant, then it would be an IEQ. When it comes to the PQ, another thing that we would like to highlight, where there is a change of controller or an officer, so apart from application purposes, these forms are also used in a supervisory context. So in case there is a change of controller or an officer, apart from the notification under Section 57 of the Act, a PQ is also required to be submitted to the authority. It will not require the approval from the authority, like during the application process, but it still should be submitted as part of the notification pack so that we are aware of the competence of the proposed person, of the person who is actually taking office, holding office in the license holder. Again, going back to the PQ, as I mentioned, they are applicable to individuals. The first tab, when you see in the PQ, that should be completed, includes the identification details. These are general details pertaining to the proposed individual. When it comes to the second tab, which is called role, there are some questions that are being asked around the proposed person's experience, time allocation, potential conflicts of interest in relation to the proposed role. And the third tab is background, is meant to capture information around a person's propriety to actually hold the proposed role. We know that under this section, not all questions are applicable to everyone. There are some questions that are applicable only to shareholder controllers and beneficial owners, not other key officials of the company. So obviously not all cells are required to be completed. And the IEQ, as we mentioned, is applicable to institutional shareholder controllers. And as you will see in the form, there is some information, high level around the ownership and control structure of the institutional shareholder controller, including some financial information. So for example, audited accounts. Again, the rationale behind the PQ and the IEQ is to assess the fitness and properness of proposed persons. And when we're talking about fitness and properness, when it comes to key officials, is not only the integrity, but also the competence to take the proposed role. In view of the new documents, in view of these forms that have been introduced, as you may notice, the information bulletin that AXA mentioned before has also been updated. So from a substantive document, it has been notified into a document that explains the process to submit an application, as well as the process at Authorizations and Licensing Committee, ALC, as we call it. So from a substantive, it has changed, it has morphed into a procedural document. Some other information that you may also find in the information bulletin, apart in relation to the application process, you're also going to find the application fees for the different license classes, some wire details, as well as the authorities' service turnaround timelines when it comes to the completeness check, how long it will take, is envisioned to take, how long it will take to provide you with the initial comments when it comes to an application, how long it will take after being in receipt of your feedback to proceed with the presentation to the ALC. So the information bulletin now provides a snapshot of the entire process. And the last form that I would like to speak about is the material change notification form. AXA mentioned this form before, and as she mentioned, it has been introduced for the purposes of Section 22 of the Act. This form has been introduced to guide license holders on the minimum information required to be submitted to the authority for the purpose of assessing the material change in business notification under Section 22. As you may see in the form, it includes several tabs for each type of material change in business, including in Section 2. It could be a new product or service. It could be a modification to an existing one. It could be amalgamation or acquisition with another company. It would be any other change in the business plan. What should be highlighted is that digital asset businesses should complete only the tabs that apply to the specific proposed material change in the business. So not all tabs should be completed, given that not all tabs will be applicable, presumably. For example, under the product tab, you will see that a digital asset business, a license holder, is required to provide information in relation to the proposed product. So further to AXA's overview of the updated code of practice and the product due diligence guidance that was issued by the authority, if you see in the last row of this tab, a license holder is required to submit the due diligence carried out in relation to the said product, which minimum expectations are set out in the code and the guidance itself. So these documents, the material change notification form and the guidance in the code of practice, should be seen as complementary, and they should be understood as such. Whereas the code and guidance refer to the due diligence required to be carried out by a license holder, the form itself refers to the information that the license holder should submit to the authority as part of the notification, so that we are in a position to assess the pertinent notification and the pertinent material change in business. And with that, I conclude my part of the presentation, and we could start with any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Christos. I will just turn off the recording. There's a few questions in the chat. Maybe I'll ask the question in the chat while the recording is still on and keep them anonymous. So in the meantime, please feel free to ask any questions you have in the chat, and I'll ask them, and then I'll keep the name anonymous anyway. The idea is to get the information. So Christos, can you clarify who is required to complete the institutional questionnaire in the context of a digital asset business?
Definitely. So the institutional questionnaire is meant to be submitted by someone who qualifies as a shareholder controller. So a shareholder which is an institutional, which is a legal person or legal arrangement. So if there is a shareholding structure with a company or a trust or another type of legal arrangement or another type of legal vehicle, in relation to that shareholder, an IEQ is required to be submitted.
Thanks, Christos. There's another question that says, what is included in the information package that you have mentioned? I think AXA mentioned it.
So in the information package, we basically amalgamated our guidance as well as legislation for both digital asset business and digital asset issuances. We've also appended in that the FAQ document. So if anyone's interested in receiving that information package, definitely send us a note at fintech@bma.pm, and we'll be happy to send that over to you. But it should be all of the information that's already on these new landing pages. We had created the information packages when, we had the previous layout, but it should still be, it should be much easier now, but we're still happy to send that out.
Yeah, if I can add to that, I think our expectation is that because, if we send a package around, it'll get, we will not have the latest updated documents. So by making the landing page easier, we hope that, people will kind of always go to that page to seek the relevant information and ensure they have the latest and greatest. Another question that came in from a lawyer: should we use office hours when we are progressing an application, or is it more for potential applicants?
Yeah, so office hours are meant to be like short discussions. So if it's a short discussion you wish to have and you just want to book something really quickly with us and ask a quick question, that's fine. But I mean, if you're going through a process and you want to have an engaged discussion and it's going to take longer than 20 minutes, by all means, like we're very willing to have a longer discussion with you. You're not limited to 20 minutes by any means.
Yeah, we really just want to multiply the opportunities we have to, have discussions with you and the industry. Maybe a question for Christos. So does the authority require the forms for, a request to be made, or do we accept other forms of notification? For example, the material change of business, do we require the form, or is it, would an email still be acceptable?
So the idea of introducing these forms is to streamline and standardize the process. So we would highly encourage everyone to use the notification forms that can be found on the website when proceeding with a material change in business notification. Whereas we follow a substance over form approach, it could always be the case that if you don't use this particular form, then not all the information that we require would be there. And this would potentially lead to unnecessary back and forth communication. So we do strongly encourage to use the forms when you're actually submitting a notification to the authority.
Yeah, so I think it would, I would say it's a requirement. But then again, if you're for some reason unable, or, I don't know what might trigger a situation where there's an emergency or whatnot, and you can't use the forms, then, that's fine. But really it should be seen as a requirement. So another question for Christos, would you use Section 8 where an applicant was seeking an exemption for an audit requirement, for example? And maybe, Section 8 under the Digital Asset Business Act is the section that grants powers to the authority to exempt a DAB from any requirement in the legislation, for your information. So Christos, can we use Section 8 for that? Should we use Section 8 for that?
Again, the Section 8 is for any statutory requirement under the Act, which means that it would include that requirement. Now, having said that, it needs to be demonstrated why this exemption should be applied for. In general, we see Section 8 for other requirements. It could be, for example, when it comes to audit, it could be, let's say, for the first year, and it could be applied for. But again, depending on the circumstances in relation to each and every application for exemption, what would be very interesting for us and what would be crucial is to also include the rationale behind that application. And I'm going to leave it to that at this point in time.
Yeah, but yeah, the Section 8 application box really is a good opportunity to make it clear to the authority that you would seek an exemption. Another Section 8 example that we've seen as of late is exemption to recognize or to limit the applicability of section 22, which is material change of business, in cases where companies are looking to introduce new products, provided that they narrow down their product to a specific category that has a similar risk profile, instead of notifying each and every time, for example, that they want to list a token, the authority where there's been a demonstration made that would not impact materially the risk profile of the entity, as granted Section 8 exemptions in those circumstances. So this is something that could be made once you have a license, but this is also something that could be requested directly at application stage. Usually we will not grant those Section 8 applications related to Section 22. So limiting the applicability of material change of business for companies that are in our sandbox stages, either in a Class T or a Class M. We wish to limit that to the Class F. But again, we would have the power to do it. So, if there's, a good reason why we're willing to entertain that. So there was a question from a council that asked if the executive summary letter was still required to be submitted at application stage. Christos, likely that's a question for you.
Yes, so that would no longer be required because this has been replaced by the documentation checklist tab at the end. So essentially, this is used as a summary of all documents that are being provided, that are being submitted as part of the application pack. And this is what is being used by us for the completeness check.
Right. And by all means, we still welcome, letters or additional information, that you feel is relevant or that may provide additional context or that may facilitate the decision-making of the authority, but it's not a requirement. Sorry, I'm just browsing through the chat. There's been quite a lot going on. There was a question for companies that are in the sandbox if the KPIs template that they have to submit to the authority from time to time are to remain as is, or is there a new format that will be introduced?
For the time being, we'll use the same format as now we're testing that with our existing entities. So as we learn with them and we want to evolve them, we will work on that with them. But for now, it will remain in this format.
Yeah, and we definitely welcome your feedback on those templates. Not only that, but for future templates or things that you think should be templated to make it easier, because the idea is to make everyone's job, easier. There was a question here that was specific to a company, so I'll speak to that privately with that person. So a question that came in is the threshold for shareholder controller defined as plus over 10% under the Digital Asset Business Act. Christos, do you remember it by heart?
Correct, yes.
10%. It is true that it is 10%, but there's also some subtleties to that 10%. So, there's some other ways that someone could be deemed to be a shareholder controller if it has the power to exert influence on the entity through other forms of indirect control, I would say. But you may have a look at the definition, but broadly 10% is the threshold. Yes. A question that came in, I think it's slightly specific, but Axa, could you give us a little bit more information about the Global Financial Innovation Network, its benefits, and the potential for recognition with overseas regulators? I think it relates a little bit to the global sandbox process.
Yeah, so GFIN, I guess more broadly, is an organization that we had joined at its inception, really. It was meant to kind of create a network of regulators around the world, particularly important to us, right, as we're kind of building a new regime. So I wanted to make sure that we were either benchmarking or creating new standards and getting that feedback from other regulators. There's a number of different work streams within the GFIN. One of them is the cross-border testing sandbox. It's the second iteration of it that's going through it right now. We had a initial sandbox period last year. It's not a continuous sandbox like the one that you would be familiar with in Bermuda. So it's not like you can apply at any point in time. There are cohorts that go through the sandbox. So the second cohort is actually just going through its testing. It's about to enter its testing phase now. So you can apply to as many as 30 jurisdictions, but at least 2 jurisdictions to kind of scale your operations. The idea is that you have a coordinated approach on part of the regulators. So you have, one application form for multiple regulators. So if you click on whatever regulator you're interested in, their specific requirements will pop up. And the applications then are also reviewed in a coordinated way across the various regulatory organizations. So you're not resubmitting certain information. From the group of regulators, you might have a smaller subset that will actually partake in the test with you. There will be a lead regulator that will be assigned to you that will kind of manage that relationship. And then, and then generally what we're finding is that these companies don't necessarily need to fall into regulatory capture. So it doesn't necessarily need to be a DAB. It could be anything. It could be a reg tech. It could be a soup tech. It could be, anything that would fall into a broader definition of an innovation hub. So with that, we could provide support like, helping you with some testing, identifying perhaps some use cases that might be interesting for some of our registrants, et cetera. Or if you're looking for, or if the regulator itself is your target audience, then we could perhaps engage and decipher what is it that we're actually looking for. So it's an opportunity to kind of further engage. You do build a lot of relationships as a company with many regulators at one point. So that's good or bad for you, depending on how good your application is. So that there is an opportunity there. And you could even go through this process and realize, you know what, I've dealt with like 20 regulators throughout this process, but I've realized through the compendium, which tells me all the information about the various sandboxes and in dealing with regulators and what's interesting about each jurisdiction, that there's 3 jurisdictions that actually make the most sense to me, or none of them do, or one specific one does. That's fine. What's important to mention for the sandbox for GFIN is that it has to be at least 2 regulators participating. If it's only one, it's not a cross-border test anymore. It would fall out of the scope of the GFIN. So with that, then you could still have an opportunity to test individually with different regulators, but that's still an option. So a little bit about GFIN. So we are very heavily involved. Generally, when we're looking at sandboxes and you are falling into regulatory capture, it would be a Class T license from a DAB perspective. So it's still meant to be a little bit lighter for you, just so that you have the opportunity to kind of grow, test, and scale with other regulators. So definitely an option. So if you're interested in that, definitely let us know. If you go to the GFIN section of the website, you can actually find an overview of it. The press release that we had issued, the application form, the compendium, all of that's on there for you to view and review.
Thank you, Axa. With that, this was, the essence of the questions in the chat. There's a few that we'll respond to directly with the entities. That being said, I can stop the recording here, and we have 5 more minutes to ask questions, or we'll hang around if you want people to drop off and have a quick conversation. That's fine. But I really want to thank you all for coming. Thank Axa and Christos as well, and the team really to have prepared this webinar. We want to bring you more content that helps you understand what the authority is seeking in doing various things. But really one of the great things with these, and hopefully someday they'll be in person, is really to kind of recognize the growth of this ecosystem. And it's really good to see you all here today. So I'll stop the recording, and if you have any questions, you may ask them, and for those that have to go, that's also fine. Thank you very much.